Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, along with Manny Hill once again, maybe a little bit later than we usually are on a Thursday, which I take no responsibility for. I'm going to blame somebody else. No, it was actually I misscheduled the other episode, so you get back to back, which hopefully is fun, and people are staying on the channel and watching us talk football all night. So, Manny, we have playoff football upon us. We have bad weather playoff football upon us. It's just a magical time of year, as always. Unfortunately, I'm not traveling anywhere to cover any playoff games, but we can still leave a giant dent in the couch from flopping my body on it and doing nothing but watching football. And when the NFL switched from 6 to 7 playoff teams, I was like, man, look, no 7 seeds ever going to win. I went back and looked through the 7 seeds. What do we even have these teams for? Those 7 seeds were never worthy. They were never deserving. This is an abomination. Roger Goodell, what are you doing? And then this week, I'm just going to enjoy watching absolutely nothing but all the football games. And I guess I have to apologize to Roger Goodell for ever scrutinizing the addition of another playoff team. Now, don't make it 8. Don't be ridiculous. Don't be like the NHL and everybody gets a participation trophy for being in the playoffs. But I guess we're good having 7. How are you, man?
I'm good. I'm just like you. I'm excited for this weekend. There's a lot of really exciting storylines, I think, for almost all of these matchups, really. I mean, with the Packers and Cowboys, McCarthy against the Packers, and you got obviously we talked about we got the matchup we wanted with the Rams and the Lions, right? That was the one we kind of talked about a week or so ago. So it's gonna be fun. I'm looking forward to it. It's gonna be a fun couple of days.
So I want to go through these games, talk about them, talk about the Vikings connections, what the Vikings can learn, and you can't use should have signed Joe Flacco. You just can't. That one's not allowed for to talk about Cleveland and Houston. But I want to start with Bill Belichick and Pete Carroll and just talk about them for a minute because we've spent so much time on the channel focusing on the quarterback situation as we should. I also recorded an episode that's going to run on the YouTube channel tomorrow night with Jeremiah Searles talking more about that and his opinion on it. And so we'll get to it. If people have questions on it, comments on the quarterback situation, we can definitely answer those and talk about it. But I wanted to take a second, since it's hot routes, to discuss 2 of the greatest coaches of all time. Of course, Nick Saban, too, on the college side, but specifically Carroll and Bill Belichick. Stepping away from their teams, it seems like Bill Belichick wants to carry on and wants to coach somewhere else, or at least that's the way the reporting seems. And Pete Carroll is being bumped upstairs into whatever advisor type of role, so he won't be coaching anymore. But what's your feels right now, Manny? I remember when Don Shula and Marv Levy were retiring as coaches, and we go through this every once in a while where we just kind of have all at once, like all the legendary quarterbacks stepping away, all the legendary coaches stepping away. And for the last 20 years, 25 years of us watching football, these 2 dudes, in some way or another, whether it was USC with Pete Carroll, but then for a decade with the Seattle Seahawks, and then Belichick forever, have been leading these great teams. So what were your thoughts to see these 2 not coaching their respective squads anymore? And Manny froze. Hate when that happens. Manny has a resting face that you actually can't tell if he froze or not. So I will talk about this until Manny inevitably unfreezes, and he will stare at me judgingly. I'm going to take him off the screen. He looks too creepy when he's staring at me. Manny will be back shortly after he unfreezes. Let's check on him. Let's check on him. No, he's still there. He's still frozen. Let's not do that. That's weird. So anyway, well, I guess I was thinking when it came to Pete Carroll that when a coach steps away, what I really love is on social media, or this goes for players retiring, this goes for a lot of different things, but people start to dig up lots of stuff from their career that they like and then share it. And there's a lot of things that I didn't necessarily see along the way, whether it was from Bill Belichick or whether it was from Pete Carroll. And with Pete Carroll, what I've always really enjoyed about him is he was kind of proof to me that you could be a positive person and still be a really effective coach. Manny, you're going to have to listen for a minute here. I'm in the middle of something. Thanks for stopping back in. I was having fun with your frozen face for a few minutes there. So, just to make the point, and I think you'll appreciate this, Manny. Pete Carroll had an extremely positive, like never-ending joy for coaching football. And when you see him retire, all these players show up at his house for or whatever restaurant they were doing his going away party, and all of them sharing on social media these stories of Pete Carroll, how he changed their career, how he changed their life. And I think that too often in sports, it not the highest levels, people will try to emulate Bill Parcells or Bobby Knight or and look, those guys are great coaches, and maybe their perception was not quite who they were on a day-to-day basis, but too many coaches try to be some version of Mr. Hardass, Mr. I'm gonna, beat down my players into the dirt. And I think Pete Carroll showed that you don't have to be like that. Like you can be a teacher, you can be somebody who supports your players and gets behind your players and comes along with a lot of enthusiasm and fun for the job and still do it at the highest level, the Super Bowl level, the national championship vacated, national championship level without being that guy who's just overbearing and an ogre and is Mr. Hardcore football, which is ironic that we're also going to talk about Belichick, but I really always respected that about Pete Carroll.
Pete Carroll was just fun, man. Like you look at the way that he connected with his players, and you would, it's no surprise he was so successful as a college coach at USC. I mean, winning the national championship a couple of different times and having those great players of Reggie Bush and Matt Leinart, Lendale White, all of those guys. Because you look at his demeanor and the way he, was kind of running up and down the sidelines, pumping his fist and just big smile on his face every time something big happened. Like you associate that with a college coach connecting with young players just coming out of high school and doing the whole college experience. But it carried over into the NFL, when he got to the Seahawks, that same style seemed to work for that organization. They built a great team, a great defense, and turned themselves into a Super Bowl champion. And it just kind of showed that style can work. It doesn't always have to be, like you said, the hard ass, the disciplinarian, the military, the militant style approach that maybe a Belichick or a Bill Parcells might have had. And Pete was really very successful with it, and that part of it wasn't really a surprise to me because Pete had coached in the NFL before he went to USC. He was coach of the Jets for 1 year in '94. His final win as Jets coach, ironically, came against the Minnesota Vikings, by the way, that year. And then he went on to coach the New England Patriots for 3 years, taking over for Bill Parcells when he left in 1997. Pete had some mild success there. Wasn't what he had initially wanted. That team had come off of being in a Super Bowl, and they were kind of like a middling 500, just over 500 type of team in his 3 years there. But it wasn't a complete train wreck, and I think it showed that his style could work. He took it to USC. It was great. It was a great run. And when you look at Pete Carroll's record, I mean, we're talking about a guy that 14 years with the Seahawks, I think he only missed the playoffs 4 times in 14 years. And I think he only had, was it 2 losing seasons, I think, the entire time? The first year, 3 losing seasons, okay. The first 2 seasons in Seattle were losing seasons, but the first year, they won the division at 7-9, and, for as much crap as we may give that Seattle team for getting into the playoffs with a losing record, playing in a bad division, they knocked off the, at that time, defending champion New Orleans Saints in the postseason. And that was, again, a high-powered Sean Payton, Drew Brees offensive juggernaut. So It was a hell of a run, and I know people are gonna look back at that second Super Bowl and say that they should have won it. They would have just given the ball to Marshawn. Um, but I think you factor that in, that they were, a couple yards away from winning 2 consecutive Super Bowls, and just look at the overall body of work in those 14 years in Seattle. It was really impressive. So it was a hell of a run for Pete Carroll.
I'll never in my life understand how they didn't give that ball to Marshawn Lynch.
I
I'll
know.
tell you, that's one of the things where, when you meet God at the pearly gates or whatever, I guess St. Peter's there, but I don't know if he's got the answers. So you ask God, he says, "Ask me one question. Why didn't they hand it to Marshawn?" I mean, he was unstoppable. He dominated that game. He had made a catch down the sideline. He was just crushing. Anyway, if he wins another one, he's probably considered one of the greatest coaches of all time. And because he didn't, I think he is on the second tier of great coaches, but not up in that upper echelon elite all timers, and probably deserves to have at least some discussion about where he stands for all timers. But, there have been a number of coaches who win one Super Bowl and have pretty solid careers otherwise. It is really hard to keep an organization in line for that long, especially with what they went through post Marshawn, or post not handing it to Marshawn, because that was the point where they could have easily lost the entire team and him been fired the next year. And yet they remained competitive. They remained a playoff team. And they're probably a couple of defensive performances a little better. Russell Wilson in the playoffs a little better from going deep again. And there's always those kind of moments. There was a game against Green Bay where they had a chance and it just didn't quite happen and they never got back. But a lot of times when you have something like that go down, it is a huge challenge to overcome it. So I just a lot of respect for him. And a lot of teams started copying their style of defense after they won. But I think that they stuck with that defense for too long because the NFL has always shape shifted so fast, kind of like we've seen the wannabe Fangio people, where the offense has figured out how to beat it. Unless Vic Fangio himself is running it, then it's pretty good because he could shapeshift more. But the copycats were not as good. And even with Seattle just not adapting, not changing quite enough, they may have let some still very good Russell Wilson years get away. So no coach is perfect, but really, if you're going to copy, if you coach junior high baseball or something, like look for who should I look to? Pete Carroll's a great guy to look to as someone who always did it in a way that didn't manipulate players, made people want to be there, made people want to stay there. And on the other side is a guy who had Tom Brady as his quarterback. He definitely had Tom Brady as his quarterback, and that's when he was really great. I don't mean to disrespect Bill Belichick, an all-time great coach, and the defensive coordinator who authored one of the great performances in Super Bowl history against the Buffalo Bills. So a great career. He got a screw job in Cleveland. He had that team started to turn around, and then they decided they were moving to Baltimore. That was unfair to Bill Belichick. But what he did in New England is darn near unprecedented, all-time great, as best as you can ever get. And Mike Zimmer would have done the same thing if he had Tom Brady. Who wants to say it? Who wants to say it? Come on. I
Nah,
don't know. It's hard. He's a hard one for me. I think he's a defensive genius. I also think he cheated in a bunch of different ways, and he fell ass backward into the greatest quarterback in the history of the universe, who went to another team and won the Super Bowl immediately. So there's always that part of me that's going to be like, yeah. I mean, I think Belichick was really, really, really brilliant. And he was great at knowing when to move on from players, when to keep players. If you have one game and one man to scheme against the great offense, you hire Bill Belichick to do that. I do think that his coaching tree is a little bit reflective of him and how much they have failed and how much that approach usually only works with Tom Brady. I think what happened with Mac Jones and how that fell apart was also reflective of how that only really works with Tom Brady. And that has to be part of the discussion when we talk about Bill Belichick. But there's no taking away from the history, the rings, and where he stands versus all coaches who have ever existed. But I'm just a little, when you get Sean Payton, how's he looking? When you get that guy, you just
Yeah.
get to be a genius forever, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, you even think back to, like, a guy like George Seifert, who had a great run in San Francisco, taking over for Bill Walsh in 1989. He has Joe Montana, and then Montana leaves, and he's got Steve Young, and then as soon as he leaves the 49ers and goes to Carolina, he doesn't have Steve Young or Jerry Rice or Terrell Owens or any of those other guys anymore, and it's not good. Probably a reason why George Seifert isn't in the Hall of Fame, because he had a great run in San Francisco, winning the 2 Super Bowls there. But yeah, with Belichick, you can't deny the success, but you do always kind of wonder, like, with spy gates and deflate gates and just all of those little controversial things. You look at some of the ways. I mean, we go back to, again, Super Bowl 49, where if Seattle hands the ball off to Marshawn Lynch, that's one less Super Bowl ring that Brady and Belichick have. But the flip side to that is, if David Tyree doesn't make a circus catch in Super Bowl 42, maybe you end up having the greatest team in the history of the NFL going 19-0, in the modern era. So it is a complicated journey, but I think when you look at the little things that they were able to do, especially during that first half of the dynasty, playing Troy Brown at defensive back, your one of your leading wide receivers is coming in and playing like a nickel corner at times, or like a hybrid safety, so to speak, and just doing little things like that we really didn't see anybody else do. And to take a sixth round quarterback, and he gets inserted as your starting quarterback because your starter gets injured, and you go on this sort of magical run, and you take down the greatest show on turf to one of the biggest upsets in Super Bowl history. And then I think, when I do think of Belichick and sort of the coaching aspect of him, I do think about that last Super Bowl against the Rams, where they're going up against Sean McVay's high-powered offense that just steamrolled through everybody that year. You've got Jared Goff playing at an unbelievable level. You got Todd Gurley, who was an MVP candidate that year. Those receivers were really good, and Belichick's defense just shut them completely down in that Super Bowl, and that was really impressive. So it's a complicated resume, but you can't deny just the amount of winning that they did and were able to sustain for a long time. A lot of that had to do with Brady, obviously, but you can't deny the numbers, man. It's crazy.
I mean, it all had to do with Brady, but I'm mostly like that. That goes for anyone. Like Greg
Yeah,
Popovich without Tim Duncan is a tanking team that ends up drafting Wembanyama number one, right?
yeah,
And that goes for just about any coach, not just about every coach at the highest level. There's only so much that you can coach up, and we saw that from Belichick. You can't coach up not having anyone who could catch the ball. He probably destroyed Mac Jones' confidence, or Mac Jones just isn't very good and had no offensive line and so forth. And there's no coaching up that. I think that where he was very good over the years was doing the same thing we saw Brian Flores doing. Number one was scheming and game planning on a game to game basis, which takes finding very intelligent players. And he was brilliant at scouting and bringing in guys on his defensive side that could handle so much mentally that you could put in different game plans every week. It wasn't just play our scheme. And a lot of teams do that now, if not every team. But when he first started doing it, I don't think every team did that. I think they played their schemes, and it was our scheme versus your scheme. We'll see how it matches up with a few tweaks. But he started putting in a lot of different stuff each week. And with Flores, you saw him look at a Josh Metellus and go, you know what? I see something there. There are so many examples of Belichick saying, you know what? I see something there. And it was special the way that he was able to do that on defense. And if you look at the year to year, how many points they allowed, there is so many years where they are in the top 5, so many years they're in the top 10. So every year Tom Brady had a chance to go win a Super Bowl. And yeah, you certainly also deserve credit for being the one that found Tom Brady. Did you find him or just take a shot in the dark and have it turn out to be the greatest thing ever? That's probably the latter. But, he was the one that stuck with Tom Brady after Drew Bledsoe got hurt and he won those games. And that's how they win the Super Bowl. But it's just impossible to deny that when you look around the league and you go, who else could have been Bill Belichick over the years if they had the best quarterback ever? So that's maybe being more cynical than it deserves. But he's going to go down. We're talking about, top 5 coaches of all time in the league. So he's going to go down that way. And we'll see if he goes somewhere else. Do you think he should go somewhere else? And who do you think would hire Bill Belichick at this point? Because if you're hiring him, he becomes your whole franchise.
Yeah, that's the thing that every team is going to have to consider. If you're the Atlanta Falcons, if you're the Washington Commanders, if you're, I, I'm not sure after the Josh McDaniels experience that the Raiders would do it, would go that route. Although there is talk that Mark Davis wants to bring in a big name guy. You know what I mean? I mean, personally, I think Antonio Pierce deserves serious consideration for that job because he did a great job taking over when things kind of fell apart under McDaniels. But you said it. If any team that wants to bring in Bill Belichick has to understand he's gonna want the ability to go buy the groceries and cook the food. That's just what's gonna come with it. It's kind of like, any team that gets LeBron James, any NBA team that gets LeBron James, you have to understand, like, you are in championship mode now. Like, it is bleep them picks. It is go get anybody that can help you win right now. And Bill Belichick, that's the other thing is you bring him in, you've got to be in a position where you can turn things around pretty quickly because that's what he wants to do at his age. He's 71 years old. He's going to be 72 when next season starts. So, it feels like, I'm just trying to think, the Chargers have the young quarterback in place. Feels like that might make some sense, but they're in kind of a weird cap situation where they've got a lot of guys. They got to figure out how to get underneath because I think they're like 34 million over the cap right now as we go into the offseason. So that's going to be a bit of a challenge to kind of construct that for them. But it seems to make the most sense because of the quarterback being in place already. I don't know if you're Bill Belichick, if you want to step into a situation, like Atlanta that doesn't really have a quarterback, unless you think you can sign a veteran, Kirk Cousins, maybe, who knows? But if you're a team that thinks you can sign a veteran that can step in and perform right away, then I think it would make some sense for Bill Belichick to go there because obviously he's going to want to win right away.
Yeah, that's really the only 2 teams that I can think of unless there's a quarterback answer for the Raiders because they have the defensive players that they showed a lot of improvement, and their defensive coordinator, also Patrick Graham, is getting a lot of looks for a head coaching position and turned that defense around big time. Also was a big part of the Giants defense that turned around there as well. So he's got a good resume to potentially go somewhere else, but they have a decent roster to start with. A top 3 edge rusher in the league is a good place to begin with Max Crosby. And they have Devontae Adams and some other weapons. And if you have a quarterback solution and I'm Bill Belichick, okay, then we can compete. But if you don't, then what are we talking about here, right? Like, are you signing Andy Dalton and just telling Bill Belichick to go figure it out? I don't think so. Are you talking Tom Brady out of retirement to come play for the Raiders? Yeah, I don't think so. That's why the Chargers make the most sense, unless, as you said, they have plans to sign Kirk Cousins in Atlanta. But Belichick would have to make this decision very soon. You can't wait until March to see if you're going to get Kirk Cousins in free agency. You'd have to be
Right.
really confident that that was going to happen. So the Chargers having Justin Herbert already in place and desperately needing defense, then that's where you could do a lot better because What they had in Brandon Staley was just not good over the last couple of years when it came to the defense. That was supposed to be his expertise. It wasn't. You can have Belichick rebuild that probably pretty quickly with his acumen for the defensive side. And then you've already got a franchise quarterback and bang, you're in contention. That's the only spot, though. I mean, I just don't see any other positions that you'd want. Even like a Washington, that's a full rebuild. That's years to go. I would imagine he wants to win right away. So let's talk about these playoff games, Manny. I am very excited. And I'm just going to go down the list in the order in which they will happen. And I want to talk about the games and also about how these teams were built, how they got there, and how that pertains to the hometown Minnesota Vikings. We've got Cleveland and Miami are playing at 3:30. Not Cleveland and Miami. Cleveland and Houston, I'm sorry, are playing at 3:30 on NBC. And the Miami is playing on Peacock, so only a few people will get to see it. But what do we take away from this one, Manny? I mean, how snarky do you want to be about tanking and how quickly you could turn around a team when you tank? Because Houston has done something really special this year with CJ Stroud. At the same time, Kevin Stefanski may win Coach of the Year. I know that there's some argument that Kirk Cousins has never had anything around him, but his former offensive coordinator might be the two-time Coach of the Year, so maybe he did. Anyway, how snarky do you want to be about these games? Go ahead. You go snark away, snark away.
Well, I mean, I'll be snarky in a couple different ways in regards to the Houston Texans. As far as, hey, tanking does work. Drafting a young quarterback high can work. Also, Ohio State quarterbacks in the NFL can be successful, case in point with CJ Stroud and the Houston Texans. And they've got some young weapons there. And it feels like DeMeco Ryans is really building a really nice culture. And this was a team that was, 2 years ago with just the state of the franchise and all of the Deshaun Watson stuff going on, all that drama. This team was this franchise was kind of a laughing stock. I mean, a lot of people, nobody was taking them seriously. But what they've done now, turning things around the last couple of years and getting to this point, tanking was a part of it, and it's worked. It's gone really well. I mean, you've got the offensive rookie of the year at quarterback. You've got a guy that might win coach of the year, or at least get a significant amount of votes in DeMeco Ryans, who's done a really nice job. It works, man. You got to give it a shot. I think if you're the Vikings, you have to look at the Houston Texans and say, hey, if we do this, it could potentially work. And we've got some pieces in place already, but and with Cleveland, dude, that roster is just absolutely loaded, especially on defense. And it's such a good roster that Joe Flacco can go out there and throw a ton of interceptions and it still can kind of work out for them. Now, are they going to go to the Super Bowl with him, kind of just slinging the ball all over the place, kind of recklessly? I don't think so, but I do think they're going to be a very tough out because of that defense and because of some of the weapons that they have on offense too. Yeah, it's going to be fun, man. I'm really looking forward to it. That's one of the games out of the 6 this weekend that I'm really, really intrigued to see, because I want to see how the Texans handle all of this sort of instant success of, like, they won their division, when Jacksonville was in charge of that thing in the middle of the season. And the Texans found a way to come back and win it. And then you've got, with the Browns, just all the craziness with the multiple quarterbacks and Flacco coming in off his couch basically and leading them into the playoffs too. It's going to be a fun game. I'm looking forward to it.
It would be something if Kevin Stefanski's resume for playoff wins was as the quarterback coach for Case Keenum, as the offensive coordinator for Kirk Cousins' only playoff win of his career, and then Joe Flacco showing up in the middle of the season and ending up getting a playoff win against the Texans. I think that the Browns have an extremely high chance of winning this game because of their defense. It is a championship caliber defense.
Yes.
And this is where the rookie element often shows up. Ben Roethlisberger went 15-1 in his rookie year, and I forget who they lost to, possibly Denver. Who was
No,
it? Denver?
It was the Patriots in the AFC
Oh,
Championship.
Patriots.
Remember Rodney Harrison had the pick six at the end of the first half in that game.
Yes, yes, that's right. And eventually it was the Patriots defense that, was a little too much for the rookie. And I feel like that will be kind of the same thing here is at some point being a rookie does matter. And I also don't think that the Texans roster is there yet. I think he's been great. Nico Collins has been great. And they've got a lot of pieces to work with, but they're maybe a year away, 2 years away from being this juggernaut level. So there's kind of an advantage there for Cleveland. But I think that though, if you're taking away anything other than the snark about tanking, and hey, by the way, I'm just going to throw this out there that had the Vikings ripped it all down and traded Kirk after 2021, and maybe tanked in 2022, then they could have possibly been in line for someone like CJ Stroud or Anthony Richardson. I'm just saying, but people don't like that to be brought up. So let's look at Cleveland then. Well, they did tank to get all the draft capital to build this huge roster. You can't ignore that part. But I think that when you look at their position by position, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah said the other day, he said, I want to have a roster so good that it works through adversity. They've lost Nick Chubb, they've lost linemen, they've lost their quarterback, and their roster is so good that it has been able to overcome all these things. This is the caliber of roster around your quarterback that you need to compete for a Super Bowl. And then we ask, how far are the Vikings away? Well, a whole defensive line, one of the great pass rushers in the game, Myles Garrett, because right now Danielle Hunter's a free agent. We don't know if he's coming back or not. They have shutdown corners. They've got their weapons, which the Vikings have. But I think on the defensive side, it just shows you it's like 7 players, 8 players away, not 1 or 2 when we compare it to a team like Cleveland that's as good as they are.
Absolutely. I mean, you just look at that secondary and the way that they cover and those safeties, and they are just it's a complete unit. They have guys that get after the quarterback. You mentioned Myles Garrett, Zadarius Smith, former Viking Zadarius Smith, who has come in and just been a really solid, you know, bookend pass rusher to Myles Garrett. And their scheme works. You know what I mean? It's just like a perfect storm of talent and a terrific scheme. And offensively, they have it's not the greatest collection of weapons, but it's good enough. I mean, Amari Cooper is a good wide receiver. And Njoku is a pretty damn good tight end, and they've been able to kind of withstand the loss of Nick Chubb, who was such a huge part of what they did offensively with the running game. But, Kareem Hunt and Ford have kind of stepped into that role of being sort of the combination package there. And it's been good enough. They kind of, in a lot of ways, they kind of remind me of, and Flacco. I don't know if Flacco has been as good as Case Keenum was in 2017, but it kind of reminds me a lot of the 2017 Vikings, where you have that really strong defense. You've got some pretty good weapons on offense. You lost your star running back early in the season, and you just kind of pieced together this running game with 2 guys that have just been good, solid enough for you. And your quarterback is not costing you games right now. So it's really strange, but credit to Kevin Stefanski for kind of keeping this thing together. You lose a guy like Nick Chubb, who is beloved in that city, beloved by his teammates. You hurt for him because it was a really gruesome injury, and for Stefanski to kind of keep the team together after seeing something like that and witnessing something like that is really impressive. And I just really like what they've done over the last couple of years to kind of build this thing. And the controversy with Deshaun Watson and everything, and he wasn't even playing well, before he got hurt, and kind of overcome that too. So it's been just a great job by Kevin Stefanski and that organization.
That should be a very interesting game there. Probably a closer one than you'd usually expect from that matchup. Miami and Kansas City in 400-degree weather or whatever it's going to be. This one is going to be very hard on the Miami Dolphins with the way that they play football. Tua has a terrible record when it's under 50 degrees, much less under 10 degrees. The Chiefs are at home. Mahomes can deal with this. They throw a lot of short passes anyway with their offense. They have a great defense, which didn't get enough credit because most of the focus was on Taylor Swift this year and Travis Kelce and whatever other controversies sort of followed them with referees and all that. There's a huge advantage here for the Kansas City Chiefs. I don't think that there's much you can learn from the Chiefs outside of it's even difficult for them. When their quarterback costs a lot of money, it's even hard for them because they had to lose a player like Tyreek Hill, which ended up mattering a lot this year, maybe not as much last year. And on the other side, Miami is interesting too because Tua is a weird case for people. Some people watch Tua play and say it's just not good enough, and other people watch him play and say he's a great quarterback. I tend to think that he's a very, very, very good quarterback in a system built beautifully for him with playmakers that they went crazy with. Yet he has some limitations that I think show up when he plays against great defenses. And that sort of sounds familiar. And are they going to pay Tua? That's still in the air, right? For giving him a contract extension. And maybe one of the reasons that they didn't is so far is because of some limitations to his game, which we've seen throughout the year. So even as great as he still has this like, I'm not Josh Allen, I'm not Patrick Mahomes element. I can be defeated part to his game. But I think if you're going to learn anything from Miami, it's one, East and West football is still alive. Like you were mentioning, Bill Walsh, motions, getting guys going across the middle, left and right, speed kills, find ways to use guys who run 4.3s. I think Ty Chandler not playing until halfway through the season was a mistake for the Vikings. Find ways to use fast guys, maybe get a little bit more of that pre-snap motion into the Vikings offense and make things easier on your quarterback because that guy gets a lot of yards when he doesn't have to do a whole lot. And he makes some great throws and some great anticipation throws. But also has some, let's just throw it 4 yards to somebody and let them run 44 yards. So maybe there's some things to tweak for the Vikings offense to take away from how Miami's offense was a hack this year in a good way.
And it may be a way to, if you're dealing with, if you are deciding to bring Kirk Cousins back, maybe some quicker dropbacks and quick throws for Kirk could help. I mean, Kirk has always been very durable, but it's also, those quick throws and quick slant throws, 4 yard passes, and letting your receivers do the rest of the work. It's also a pretty good way to keep your quarterback healthy. And we know that Tua has had some injury issues in the past, and he's been able to stay healthy this year, I think, because he's not taking as many hits as he has in the past. And it's been very beneficial for him. And, maybe if you are bringing Kirk Cousins back, or if you are going to go with a young quarterback, having him do some quick drops and just let the ball just come out right away. Get the ball to Jefferson, get the ball to Addison. TJ Hawkinson is not really a guy that goes deep down the field anyway. He is kind of more of a short yardage, short to intermediate yard catching tight end. So that could be some things. Motion. I like the thought of adding some more motions and some confusion. Confuse the defense a little bit. Yeah, I mean it could be that could be something that the Vikings take from the Dolphins, and maybe that can work. Regardless of whatever quarterback that they have. The Dolphins are just such an interesting team though, because we know about the offense. They are really banged up on defense. This is going to be really hard for them on Saturday. And really, they just haven't, for as good as they've been this year, whenever they've played against like the really good teams in the league, they just always seem to come up short. And it just kind of makes you think they're not quite there yet. They maybe need to add some more pieces on defense and and just try to keep those guys as healthy as possible and just find a way to win some of those tougher games against those tougher opponents. But I don't think it's going to go very well for them on Saturday. It's going to be freezing cold. It's going to limit that offense, and that going up against that Chiefs defense is going to be a tough task.
think if Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb were healthy, then I would say watch out because the edge rushers have destroyed the Kansas City Chiefs this year. But now we're talking about they're flying in Justin Houston or something that I see at his advanced age. It's going to be tough to get after Mahomes. And that's the one way always and forever that you could get after any quarterback or cause them problems is with pressure. And I think even the mediocrity that is the offensive tackles for Kansas City will be okay in this one, where otherwise I would have thought this is a huge advantage that could decide the game. Do we mention every team that tanked recently or not? Because Miami, if I recall, one of the reasons Brian Flores can't get a job is because he didn't tank enough. And then they drafted a quarterback, and then, now they're here and threw for the most yards in the league and so forth with the quarterback they picked high and et cetera, et cetera. So, by the way, the last quarterback class that had a bunch of guys that were like this year was well, I guess it was it the yeah, I guess it was the last quarterback class with 2021. No, 2020 with Burrow, Tua, Herbert, and then Jordan Love and Jalen Hurts. That worked out pretty well for everybody, didn't it? So I don't
Yeah.
know. I guess you should just be afraid of drafting any quarterback because it might not work. Okay, yeah, that's right. You're giving like really reasoned analysis, and I'm just being a jerk, I think, throughout this. But that's kind of my role on the show. So on Sunday, so those are the Saturday games. On Sunday, we've got the Steelers and Buffalo Bills. Draft Josh Allen would be another idea for how you get to be this good. Also, what we see, and this is a benefit for the Vikings, is Sean McDermott has had changes on that defense. They've gone through stuff. They've had injuries. They've had this and that happen throughout the year. But a great defensive mind can raise all boats, and their defense has been a huge part of their success in getting into the playoffs. And on the other side of it, Pittsburgh, to me, I just look at them and their connection to the Vikings is you should call Kirk Cousins because that team is really good. Really, really good. Top to bottom, they have all sorts of talent. They're going to be without TJ Watt. That is a nightmare for them. The one player they couldn't lose, but they are the team that's a quarterback away that could be looking this offseason for some money to spend to bring at the quarterback position. So that's my big takeaway there.
Yeah, and Mike Tomlin, man, I mean, he just does it again. I remember right around this time last year, we were talking about like, Pittsburgh didn't make the playoffs last year, but they rebounded from kind of a rough start to the year and got themselves into the mix late in the year. And I remember texting you because I think they went into Baltimore and beat the Ravens or something. We got a big road win. And I think we just like text each other, Mike Tomlin, man. It's just like how does he do it? It's pretty remarkable that, he's another guy. We talked about guy, Belichick and Pete Carroll that have been able to kind of sustain this long, and obviously Tomlin had Ben Roethlisberger for a good portion of that time. But for this team to kind of be as bad as they were offensively, not because of the weapons that they have, it's because the quarterback play was just not good for most of the year. But to just, with the controversy with George Pickens a couple of weeks ago and just this team, laying an egg in Indianapolis and it just looks bad and people are saying fire Tomlin, and then you blink and here they are. And like you said, they're a quarterback away. You plug Kirk Cousins onto this roster with Pickens and the running game with Najee Harris and that defense, that's a pretty damn good team. And, you have to start thinking like, if you're Mike Tomlin, you gotta think, okay, there's a possibility if we can bring in a veteran quarterback, I might want to stick around here for a while, and maybe the Steelers front office will want to keep Mike Tomlin around, and maybe that fan base will calm down a little bit.
Yeah. Well, one thing I respect about their fan base is that anything short of a championship caliber team is a disappointment to them, even when they're in the playoffs. And again, like I just have turned up the turbo snark on this episode, but maybe consider a similar attitude. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's how every year with Ben Roethlisberger, every year under Bill Cowher, every year with Terry Bradshaw, like that's how those people grew up with football. As we expect to be in the playoffs, but it's if you're not getting us to the top of the AFC, to the Super Bowl, then you didn't do good enough. And it sort of shows you what happens when you have franchise quarterbacks and how long you can have success. But the way he's done it without those quarterbacks after Roethlisberger and even the years that Roethlisberger got hurt is so impressive. Really, again, speaks to if you've got a defensive mind that can raise all of the boats, that even when they lost all of their safeties and they're asking Patrick Peterson to go play safety, they're still finding a way to be here and pull off wins like that. So I don't know. Horse Feathers asks here in the comments if the Steelers could pay Kirk and still keep the good players they have. Here's the thing about the NFL and the salary cap. You could do whatever the hell you want for 1 year or for 2 years. After that, no, it gets totally different. And you have to sacrifice a lot. Mike Tomlin might be in a position to sacrifice a lot. He might be in a position to say, we have a team that can compete for a Super Bowl if we could get a reasonably good quarterback. Let's try to go do it, as opposed to me attempting to win with Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky. And they've done a great job with Mason Rudolph. He's been fantastic, but they have the weapons to also give Kirk as well. Like, the Vikings aren't the only team with a good wide receiver. So they are very much, in my mind, in the mix. If they could push back. Yeah, Dan says they're negative this year, but have 122 million in cap space in 2025. How is someone in the comments already on top of Pittsburgh's salary cap situation? That's very impressive, Dan. You've been thinking about where Kirk could go, but that exists for almost every team. It's like, if you have a chance, you can look what the Jets did to get Aaron Rodgers there. They moved money around. I think Rodgers had like a $7 million cap hit this year, and next year's like 50. So anybody could do that. Thank you, Dan. I appreciate the insight there, though. So yes, it is possible. I think Buffalo wins this one. It's going to be very, very hard for Pittsburgh to beat the Bills. I think we're on the same page there. It's really just how far Buffalo can actually go. Now, my favorite game of the weekend, Green Bay at Dallas. These are indeed two of the teams that Vikings fans dislike the most. Drew Pearson may have pushed off, and Packers. And I get it. But at the same time, these teams have great histories in Dallas. And what I'm really watching for, Manny, as it pertains to the Vikings, if the Packers win this game, it's going to feel pretty dark. Yeah, it's supposed to be locally, I think, about 2 degrees that day. It's going to feel colder than that if the Packers beat the Dallas Cowboys. And that's the team you're going to deal with in your division. By the way, they're the youngest team in the league. Their quarterback's been playing like a star. It's just not going to be a good scene if the Packers win that game here in Minnesota.
And I'm going to tell you, for as good as Dallas has been this year, and they are the better football team in this matchup, there's no question about that. We have seen crazy things happen with the Dallas Cowboys in the postseason the last handful of years, including when they played the Green Bay Packers. So this is going to be interesting. Everything on paper says the Cowboys should, wipe the floor with Green Bay. But strange things happen, man. The Packers are playing really well. Joe Barry may have saved his job for like a week, maybe, possibly, depending on what happens on Sunday, though. Could change everything. He probably still will be on his way out. But I mean, Jordan Love is just playing really well right now. That offense seems to have found their groove and they're clicking now. And, Matt LaFleur is a good coach. So this is going to be, I'm going to pick the Cowboys to win. I think most people will pick the Cowboys to win, but I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to be a close, competitive game because I feel like the Packers are going to be able to move the ball a little bit, and it's going to be interesting. You've got the Mike McCarthy angle of this too, and McCarthy seems to do weird things in the playoffs sometimes, and it ends up being kind of a choke job. But it should be a fun game, though. It's going to be. I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to be competitive, and Dallas will somehow find a way to win. They're the better team.
Definitely.
I mean, they should win.
Yes. Definitely a narrative game for Dak Prescott. If he loses this one, then he will be talked about for many years going forward as a quarterback who can't win in the playoffs. This is about the best version of the Dallas Cowboys Is it a hot take to say since like 1994? I mean, this team is really truly stacked. They've had other good teams along the way. They were right there with Tony Romo. So maybe that is too far. At the same time, like they are really, really, really talented. And if they can't, with CD Lamb playing the way he's playing, the addition of Brandon Cooks has been huge. You got the one of the greatest defensive players in the world at his peak. If you can't beat the Packers, then I don't know how you win with McCarthy in the playoffs and with Dak Prescott, who, by the way, McCarthy, of course, has had some goofy stuff at the end of games, but Dak has just not been good enough. They
Right.
also played San Francisco's defense a couple of times. That was a factor. Uh, Justin says Green Bay versus Dallas is a Vikings fan existential crisis. Too bad they both can't lose. I think you're tattooing a star on your chest here if you're a Vikings fan. Like Dallas annoys you because of something that happened a long time ago, but the Packers are your mortal enemy. So and also what it would mean. What it would mean is now you got to deal with them too and the Lions go, in the playoffs. Speaking of which, we've got Lions and Los Angeles Rams of Los Angeles. So I mean, this one is it's just right there. I mean, it's all written for you. Stafford versus his old team. Love that. This is my upset pick if it's even an upset. The way the Rams have played, Stafford's been great. The Lions defense is really bad. And also Sam Laporta, if he plays, is not going to be 100%. That's a major, major problem for Detroit. The only Viking connection here is that Matthew Stafford and Kirk Cousins were kind of thought of as being similar. And Stafford went to LA and won the Super Bowl with a team that was stacked through the roof and had everything kind of go their way that year. But if the Vikings are going to bring back Kirk, they have to have a Rams like plan.
Yeah.
And I guess what the Rams show is that even if you say bleep them picks, if your quarterback is good enough, you can restock well enough to be in the playoffs again. But you really only get 1 year. Like they're traveling to Detroit. So if you bring back Kirk and you take that approach, you kind of get one shot at it. And it shows you that the last 2 years from Los Angeles, they're out of the playoffs and then they're having to travel on the road with the weaker roster, I think, but I've still got them winning this game.
Yeah, I remember arguing with somebody on Twitter a couple of years ago. Well, it was during those 2021 playoffs when or 2022, January 2022, when the Rams were going on the run. And, somebody was arguing with me about the comparison of, Cousins and Matthew Stafford. And, was Matthew, the Rams can do it with Matthew Stafford. Why can't? And I said, well, yeah, but the Rams, their window of winning is they better get it done like this year. Otherwise, it's probably not going to happen. And you saw, to their credit, they got it done. They won the Super Bowl. And the couple of years since then have been kind of up and down. Last year was not a good year for them. Stafford got hurt, didn't return for the season. Aaron Donald missed most of that season. But this year, they've bounced back and they're going to be a very, very tough out. I think if if Detroit can't get a pass rush from Aiden Hutchinson, I think I think the Rams are going to have a lot of fun in this game. That Lions defense is not, and I know they played fairly well in the game against Dallas. They had the big play to CD Lamb that they gave up. You know what I mean? Otherwise, they did pretty well against the Cowboys offense, but for the most part this year, I mean, the Lions defense has been very suspect. Nick Mullins threw for almost 900 yards in 2 games against them. There's a lot of turnovers there too, obviously, but you can move the ball on that defense. It's just a matter of capitalizing. And I think with McVay and Stafford being that really good coach quarterback combination, it feels like they're going to find a way. They're going to be able to move the ball, and then when they get the ball in the red zone, they're going to score touchdowns because they've got the scheme and the weapons to be able to do that and make that happen. So, and I just wondered, all of the hype around the Lions, and they've lived up to the hype that was happening during the season because a lot of people thought they were going to take this step and win this division, and they've done that. This is still unfamiliar territory for them. You know what I mean? Having their first home playoff game in 32 years. That is bananas, or 30 years. I think it was 93 was the last one. That crowd's going to be rocking, and you kind of wonder if that adrenaline that the Rams are going to have, or that the Lions are going to have, is that's going to kind of throw them off their game a little bit, and the Rams just kind of being, hey, we're playing for house money, we're the underdog, we've got a veteran coach and quarterback, we're just going to go in and do our thing and come away with the win. So, but it's going to be fun. The storylines, Stafford with Detroit, Goff going up against McVay, because that was kind of a marriage that wasn't quite as amicable of a breakup. So it's going to be a fun game, though. I'm looking forward to it.
Jim says, I don't know if it's possible, but Lions versus Packers championship game would be the darkest timeline. And then, well, hey, look, it's totally fine because the Bears picked number 1 overall, so there would be no problems there. I mean, we'll say, because they're hosting a playoff game, this has to be considered for the future. What the Vikings do at quarterback is that the division looks like a monster. It now we can think a division's great and it turns out to be garbage. I mean, the AFC West we thought was going to be so amazing this year, and it turned out not to be. But it can be pretty good for the next, I don't know how many years, could be a lot. So you got to compete with those teams, and it's not 2 free wins against Detroit anymore. And it's, the Packers they didn't go from Aaron Rodgers to some bum. They went to Aaron Rodgers to a guy that we're talking about might have a chance to go into Dallas and win. So yeah, I guess if you're a Vikings fan this weekend, you're definitely rooting for that not to happen. And the last game on the slate, I don't have much here. Philadelphia and Tampa Bay. I'm tired of the words tush push, and I also hate brotherly shove more. And I don't know who tried to make that a thing, but I don't want that to be a thing. Maybe Baker Mayfield should be the quarterback of the Vikings if they draft somebody they need to develop. I don't really know what to say about this one. Other than this, here's the Viking connection. There's a throw to KJ Osborne at the end of the first half in week 1. He reaches back to grab it, and it gets picked off by the Bucs. They dominate the second half time of possession. They win that game. The Vikings end up out of the playoffs, and Tampa Bay ends up in, I think, by a game. How funny is that? That game where we were all like, how do you lose to the Bucs? What the heck? And then they're playing and you're not in the playoffs. So that's really it. I mean, I think what Philly is dealing with is when you go to the Super Bowl now, these days, you play so many football games that you can just count on the next year you're probably losing half your team to injury. That's one. The other thing is, too, that they did sign Jalen Hurts in the offseason. I don't think this was really why they lost some players, but they did lose some players who were big for them. Gardner Johnson is playing for Detroit now. He was big for Philadelphia last year. So, and when they lost some guys in the secondary and on defense, it was like, it's not that big of a deal. And it turned out it kind of was that big of a deal. But I think the main reason for Philly, other than that their defense has just struggled, is that Jalen Hurts is not 100%. I don't think he's been 100%. And I remember earlier this year, there was a mini controversy where David Carr on TV said that they should play Marcus Mariota for a game or two and try to get Hurts healthy. He also said Hurts can't read defenses, which was his mistake. And obviously he's wrong. But he was probably right about the health of Jalen Hurts, because I think it's been a problem. That team seems like they're kind of a mess. This is my hot prediction. I'm giving this one everywhere, Manny. This game's going to be wild. It's going to be a great football game between 2 mediocre teams that aren't going anywhere else. But wild card weekend for one day on Monday, I guess it's not the weekend. We're going to have a lot of fun with this one. That's my only take. I don't think there's any more real Viking connection here.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I mean, the Baker Mayfield part of it, if the if the Bucs lose this game, there's a pretty good chance Baker Mayfield will, move on from Tampa, and then he'll be a free agent, and that could be a potential option for the Vikings in the offseason. But if they win that game, they might want to think about trying to sign him to an extension and keep him around, because they got at least something mildly going with that team. Philadelphia is they've just been a mess for the last. They really haven't been, even when they were good, even when they started out 10-1, you kind of looked at the way they were playing and it was like, just something. The magic that they had last year is just not there. And you mentioned some of the players that they lost. You also lost your offensive and defensive coordinators because they got head coaching jobs, and I think that has had a huge impact on things as well. And yeah, like you said, I mean, Jalen Hurts is just not healthy. But I think if you're looking at the Eagles and you want to take something from the Vikings, again, it's like, even though he's a second round pick, it's like, hey, you draft a young quarterback and put him in there and might work out for you. You might go to a Super Bowl within a couple of years if you build the rest of the roster right. So I don't know, but yeah, it should be a fun game. I kind of starting to think Tampa Bay has a pretty good chance to win this game. I mean, they're at home. The Eagles have not played well for most of the year. So I'll go with Tampa Bay to win this one.
Yeah, I think you're right about the Eagles, and we're talking about a bad year for them, and they still have 11 wins, and they're still in the playoffs and so forth, and have a chance to do something here. But when you win, it's so hard to keep it together, and I think was for Philadelphia. They're so close at the end against Kansas City. They're so close, and to have it not happen, to have a lead in the Super Bowl. We saw this with the Vikings 2017 to 2018, where you get so close and you play so many games and guys get hurt and they play through stuff and they give you everything they have. And then because you played so well, people want to get paid and you lose people. And then it's hard to keep together year after year. But again, they're still a winning team. After Hurts's contract kicks in, this is going to be a lot harder for Philadelphia in the coming years. So they have to make something happen here. I don't think they're strong enough. I asked you, Manny, to make a list of your 5 most interesting players or coaches going into the playoffs. Why don't we wrap the show with Manny's list of 5? Actually, wait, hang on. I forgot to do my prize picks. Got to do the prize picks.
Mm-hmm.
So here's my prize picks. Last week, I did 4 of them, and I missed out on the one I thought was a lock. Jahmyr Gibbs did not get enough yards rushing against the Vikings. Who would have thought in a game that they were up for most of the game? But I'm taking another swing at it this week, prizepicks.com, where all you have to do is pick more or less when it comes to yardage totals, touchdowns, and even field goals. Tons of players. I mean, almost everybody in the playoffs you can pick from here. So I went with 3 quarterbacks. I went with more than 199.5 yards for Tua in the cold. I don't know if it'll go well, but I think he can get at least 200 yards. Josh Allen in the cold. This man's going to throw it around. I went with more than 274.5 yards. And Jordan Love, 224.5, going with more than that for a shootout in Dallas. And one of the things that's great about Prize Picks, doesn't cost a whole lot of money. This one right here, $20 to win, 130. So kind of tells you how it works with Prize Picks. And if you use the code PURPLE, then you can get a match up to your first $100. So there it is, prizepicks.com. Check it out. So, you can use Prize Picks in Minnesota. It's technically fantasy, I believe. So anyway, or at least I don't think I've been breaking the law by submitting it, so we'll see. But anyway, what's that knock at the door? Prizepicks.com. Oh, I'm just kidding. No, I think it's fine. Yeah. But Manny, your list, the 5 most interesting people in round 1 of the playoffs.
Number 5, going with a coach here, and I'm going with Mike McCarthy, going up against his former team, the Green Bay Packers. We just talked about how it is such an interesting matchup because the Packers are playing really well. And how embarrassing would it be for Mike McCarthy if the Cowboys can't get it done this time? I mean, Jerry Jones was just on his radio show, I think earlier this week, giving Mike McCarthy his seal of approval, and like he loves his head coach. And it's like, okay, but if they lose this weekend, how are you still going to love your head coach, or are you going to fire him the next day? So that's going to be an interesting thing to watch with Mike McCarthy. And if they lose and he gets fired, how ironic would it be that it's against the Green Bay Packers, or the team that ends up putting an end to his time in Dallas? So that's number 5. Number 4, I went with Tyreek Hill. just because this is going to be his first game back in Kansas City since he left. Now, the Chiefs and Dolphins played earlier this year, but I think that game was, I think it was in Germany, I think, when the Chiefs won that game. So it wasn't really a homecoming return for Tyreek Hill. He was playing against his former team, but this time he's coming back to Arrowhead for the first time since he got traded away. And so that's going to be really fun. Uh, number three, I went with Jared Goff going up against Sean McVay. We know how that relationship, ended, and Jared Goff was not happy about being sort of cast off from the Rams and, them sort of getting the upgrade with Matthew Stafford to replace him. And so Goff has kind of been playing with a chip on his shoulder the last, 2+ seasons. And now he gets his moment, gets the Lions back to the playoffs. And of course, who is he going up against? His former head coach, Sean McVay. And number two, I went with Matthew Stafford, obviously returning to Detroit. Going to be a lot of fun there. Enough said on that part. And number one, the most interesting player / coach for me in these playoffs is, it's a player. It's how is Joe Flacco going to perform for the Cleveland Browns? Like, he's got a really good roster around him. His play has been, I mean, they've been winning games with him. He's been reckless turning the ball over, but somehow they're still winning because of how great that defense is. And it's like, if he can just take care of the ball, make some throws, not throw any bad interceptions, that defense is good enough to kind of carry them to go on a potential deep run. I don't know if it's enough to get them to the Super Bowl, but possibly to the AFC Championship game if things kind of go their way. So Joe Flacco is going to be kind of the one that I'm watching the most of. Like, can he do this? Can he keep it going? It would be kind of cool if he did. So that's my five.
Once a decade. It's the once a decade. There's that guy. There's your Nick Foles. There's your Trent Dilfer. Somebody does it who's not supposed to do it. And that would be hilarious. It would feel like a waste of season. All these great teams and everything else. And Joe Flacco comes off the couch and wins the Super Bowl. I'm just kidding. Cleveland, if Cleveland won a Super Bowl, it would be amazing for them. Vikings fans sort of have these brothers in the AFC of Buffalo, Cleveland, and the Los Angeles Chargers, the teams with great histories that have not won. So, all right, well, it'll be great. You and I will be back on next Tuesday to break it all down. I cannot wait to do absolutely nothing but watch football. I hope that everybody else has the opportunity to do so as well, and stay inside because it's going to be cold and awful. So thanks everybody for watching all week long. It's been a really fun week here, and we will catch you next time. Football.